You're watching News at Prime. Let's take you back to one of our leading stories now. Treasury's new budget will now be tabled on the 21st of May following two previous failed attempts. Mzansi leader and SCOPA chairperson Songezo Zibi believes that government can raise the 75 billion rand budget shortfall following the withdrawal of the 0.5 percentage VAT hike. Well, he joins me now to discuss this. Mr. Zibi, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time. Before we talk about what we could possibly anticipate on the 21st of May, can we start with the credibility of this institution? I was reading this morning an opinion piece by Jabulanis Kakane. I think this is someone who's worked in Treasury before, who says the credibility of Mr. Godongwana is perhaps at an all-time low at this moment, and this could be his time to exit the stage. Where do you stand?
Look, I haven't formed an opinion on his credibility as yet, because this is a new environment for everybody. And I dare say that over the next 2 to 3 months, but let's say over the next month, there's going to be a whole lot more stakeholders, political parties and political leaders, who are going to appreciate the difficulty of this moment. And I think we've always taken for granted that a budget would pass because the ANC had a majority. The ANC does not have a majority. And I think the fundamental problem is that you also have political parties and MPs who do not want to take tough decisions and have gotten used to leaving that to the finance minister. I don't think the finance minister can take the tough decisions on behalf of Parliament anymore.
He did own the proposed VAT hike. This is the finance minister I'm talking about, to a point where he even shielded his the bureaucrats within National Treasury and said, this was my own decision. So again, I ask you, should he not own this and fall on his sword, as opposed to saying the decision lies with the president?
I think if he threw his own bureaucrats under the bus, that would be reason for him to leave, because it means the tail is wagging the dog if it's bureaucrats who make policy decisions for him. So of course it was necessary that he must own the decision. He can't pass the buck on to anyone else. So that's my opinion on that. The second thing, though, I must say, we will see, Toli, and viewers will see. The fundamental problem is that we have a parliament that thinks all it can say is no and not take the tough decision. What has occurred now is that the decision Parliament would not take earlier on, which is to say, we don't want to increase VAT. Instead, we want to cut the budget by an equivalent amount, has been forced upon Parliament by this process. And it's only now going to happen. There was nothing stopping Parliament before from saying that we don't like additional taxation on anybody in South Africa. We prefer that to cut the budget. The problem is politicians don't want to cut spending and politicians don't want to raise taxes. And they hide behind the rhetoric and the finance minister as if only the finance minister is here to take the decisions. We now as MPs get an opportunity to make good on what we've insisted on and say what must be cut from the budget. You will see people hiding behind rhetoric again.
Okay, so let's talk then about your strong belief that government can raise this 75 billion rand budget shortfall. And I take into account exactly what you're saying, that on the one hand, we have politicians who don't want to raise taxes, but at the same time, they are happy to make all kinds of spending proposals. Where is the money going to come from?
No, the whole point of this process is that there is no more money to come from anywhere. That's what MPs have told the minister. MPs have said, we can't borrow anymore. MPs have said, we don't want new taxes, not personal income tax, not VAT. So Parliament has painted itself into a corner by saying the only option is to cut expenditure by 75 billion over the next 3 years. So the budget the finance minister must table before Parliament must reflect the wishes of political parties, which is to cut spending. And if they frame it any other way, Toli, they are being dishonest. So all I was saying is that Parliament has no choice. It has already made its choice to cut expenditure. And we can cut expenditure, Toli. Yeah. There are several areas where we can cut expenditure.
Key of those areas, quickly?
Key of those areas, Toli, the public sector wage increase, which is above inflation, was not in the budget. MPs can make a decision to say public servants will only get an inflation-linked increase, not above inflation, as an example. That's something that can be done. The social relief of distress grant was supposed to be temporary. It supposedly still is. There is 35 billion therein. Parliament has got the authority to say what should happen to it and how much it should cost and so on. But I can bet you Parliament won't take that decision. They will pass the buck again. There are other areas we can defer projects that are supposed to take place. We can delay the project to reduce the public sector wage bill and get about 6 billion back from that project. But it also means we cannot reduce the public sector wage bill over time. We can also zero out what is called the contingency reserve, which is money for rainy days, 10 billion. Jacob Zuma's government did it the one time. They zeroed it out. There's 10 billion in there. But then if there's a flood or anything later on, people will be left stranded. These are the decisions parliamentarians do not want to make.
Yeah.
But we now have the choice. The only option available on the table is to make those choices. And we will get to see who wants to campaign on the problem and who wants to solve it.
Well, let me ask you to put your head on the block, because you mentioned one of what I believe is the most contentious of issues, and that is the social relief of distress grant. The finance minister, before he became finance minister, you'll remember him, he was the head of
yes.
ANC Transformation Committee. He was absolutely livid about the SRD because he was saying these are South Africans who have no issues health-wise. These are healthy but young as well. They should be out there finding jobs. And I was saying to him, but the economy of South Africa is not growing. If at any pace, it is growing at a very slow pace. So are you willing to put your head on the block and say that SRD, given that it was temporary to begin with, it must go?
We can choose to spend the money differently on the same people, on the same group of people. If, for instance, let's say we decided to reduce it to 25 billion or 20 billion, but use that 20 billion to invest in youth enterprise development to create jobs. You do two things. You reduce the expenditure, but you also make a historic investment in young people in a way that generates economic activity and also generates jobs, which pay more than 350 rand. And over 5 years, 20 billion each year instead of 35 is 100 billion rand. And if we use that money wisely, the economic impact and the impact on people's lives could be many times greater. But it also needs politicians who've got the will to make tough decisions. Yeah. I can bet you, Toli, talk to me after the 21st of May or in June. Nobody will have touched it, because we want to make it the finance minister's problem, not Parliament's problem, even though we've been elected to make policy choices and legislative choices so that ministers can implement them.
Let's end it on this point. I know you have another interview to do with the media colleagues. Let me end it on this note, and these are your words. We stand with the people of South Africa, not political extortionists. Who was that intended for?
That was intended for political parties. In fact, let me say, that was intended primarily for the Democratic Alliance. It failed to negotiate better terms for itself in its discussion with the ANC over the coalition, and has found a very powerful point of leverage over the budget in order to negotiate better terms. Now, if the DA feels that it needs better coalition terms and more serious treatment from the ANC, of course it is their right. But all of us have a responsibility to consider what damage our own political actions are causing to the South African economy and so on. and there's limits to what we are doing. We also did not want a 2 percentage point VAT increase, but we did not threaten to hold up the process on account of other demands that we may have had.
Yeah.
We could have said, in exchange for votes, give us ministerial posts. We didn't do that, Chloe. That's not the space in which you do it. You negotiate policy issues that are relevant to what is on the table.
I know it was my last question, but I think I wouldn't be happy with myself if I didn't ask you this one. There are suggestions out there that you may well be President Ramaphosa's next finance minister. Are you willing to take up the mantle?
I think it will take a very brave person to take up the job under the current circumstances. So, no. I think we must also be careful of removing finance ministers on account of coalition problems. We're going to create further instability that way. I think we need to stabilize the ship. I think we need to make sure that we end up with a budget after the 21st tabling. Parliament needs to mature and take tough decisions that are still in the interest of the South African people and result in better outcomes for South Africa's most vulnerable. And we mature and we grow as part of the process of building a coalition governments in the future. I don't think we need to take drastic actions like that.
Songezo Zibi, thank you very much for your time, sir, this evening, talking to us about Budget 3.0, the leader of Rise Mzansi and chairperson of SCOPA.